Hello, welcome to Webinar Wednesday, presented to you by CSMP. Cybersecurity nonprofit is an organization that provides free and accessible security education through webinars, presentations, workshops, hackathons, panel discussions, and more. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us continue to learn, innovate, and secure. In addition to CSMP's Director of Education, Jose Miguel Maldonado, for his assistance with today's arrangements. Please continue to join us on Wednesdays at 7 to 8 p.m. Central Time for more presentations by security experts around the world on a variety of topics, ranging from practical cyber safety and careers in security to advanced security topics. Upcoming on July 8th, we have Putting the Second to DevOps, Turning Theory into Practice, led by Matt Rose and Kurt Risley of Checkmarks. You'll learn how different organizations adopt security in their DevOps processes and understand what functionality is key to enable real automation of your AppSec program. Hello, my name is Josephino Cambosa. Tonight I'll be your host. By day, I'm a cyber warfare operator for the United States Air Force. By night, I actively engage in security research, exploit development, and reverse engineering. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, John Neff, who also performs blue team activities within Defensive Cyberspace Operations.
Hi all, I'm John Neff. I'm the local firewall subject matter expert, and I'm also a cyber warfare operator. I work on network defense and enjoy researching new internet technologies such as Node and Django in my off time.
We're excited to have this opportunity to discuss an interesting topic with you tonight. We'll be exploring the border of IT and OT concerning cybersecurity in industrial operations. As a disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed are those of the authors, which do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the United States government concerning the topics discussed. If you have any questions during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A as they arise, and we will address them at the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so I want you all to imagine that we are sitting in an indeterminate nuclear power plant of no historical significance, and it has a state-of-the-art RBMK reactor. And today we're supposed to be conducting a routine test of their systems. And we're going to use this power plant as an example throughout the talk to build our understanding of ICS SCADA, and we're going to reimagine the events to be attributed to compromises in cybersecurity. And at this power plant, unbeknownst to them, their systems have been compromised, primarily in the reactor. Well, what happened? We suspect that there has been cyber sabotage to their systems. So we will cover what a typical ICS system looks like, a government investigation and analysis of those ICS systems, vulnerabilities uncovered by those investigations, more specific historical attacks, and what we do as cybersecurity professionals to protect our systems and ICS SCADA.
Okay, to begin, we'll just start off with some definitions. So operational technology is the broad umbrella term that encompasses all of the computing systems within industrial operations as a whole. ICS systems are mission critical systems that monitor infrastructure and raw materials. For example, they control oil and gas valve actuators, conveyor belts in mining or manufacturing operations, and valve pressures in natural gas facilities. So keep in mind that ICS includes both SCADA and DCS systems. SCADA manages large complex processes that are normally found in like electrical utility grid transmissions, where the control functions are distributed over a very large geographic area. The purpose of SCADA is data acquisition, and for this reason, the networks connect many RTUs, or remote terminal units, that collect data and send it back to the command center, which uses the data for very high level decisions. And DCS is a type of process control system that connects controllers, sensors, operator terminals, and actuators. The data acquisition and control functions are performed by distributed processors that are situated near the peripheral devices and the instruments from which the data is being gathered. So while DCS and SCADA are very functionally similar, DCS is generally employed at large continuous processing facilities, and operations are almost always controlled on-site rather than remotely.
Okay, so in this diagram, most of us are comfortable in the IT world. That's going to be at the bottom, where you have your servers and your network infrastructure. And then you start moving out into the cloud, and a lot of us are still pretty comfortable, pretty familiar, and then you start to get into your industrial control systems. And this is kind of outside the environments that we're familiar with. So this chart is going to show you cyber incidents ranging from 2010 to 2016. This is why it's a concern for us, because you go from 41 incidents to 198, and then it kind of just hovers around there. And here we have a breakdown of those incidents. You're going to start with your critical manufacturing, your communications, energy, water, government facilities. And then if you look at the other, that's going to be comprised of transportation, healthcare, IT, and nuclear.
So in the US alone, we have a massive amount of pipelines, 2.4 million miles of energy cable, 72,000 miles for crude oil, and roughly 1 million miles for water transport. And as a result, ICS systems monitoring critical infrastructure can scale up to very large geographic areas. So let's dive into how these systems function and communicate on the small scale.
Okay, so here we have a microcosm of an ICS system and its components. You're going to start with your HMI. This is a human-machine interface, and it connects you to the controller. It's going to display process status information and historical information. You're going to be able to configure set points and control algorithms. Then we're going to go to the controller. That takes commands from the HMI and sends them to the actuator. The actuator is a component that actually interfaces with the control process and can be a device like a control valve, breakers, switches, and motors. And then your controlled process, I want you to think of this as like something very dangerous that we want to put lots of distance between the human and the controlled process. So this can be things like explosions, smelter, a reactor. Just think of something really dangerous. That's why we have so many layers between us and the controlled process. And then you get to your sensor. This provides feedback so you can make adjustments accordingly. And then your remote diagnostics. And this is a check on the controller and the sensor. So you can maintain historical data. You can also compare performance. And this is so you can prevent, identify, and recover abnormal operations or failures. And two extra components that are not present on the slide, but are still part of ICS is going to be your data historian. And that is a centralized database for logging all process information within an ICS and an RTU. And this is a computer with a radio interface that would go in the place of the gray arrows that you see here. And it would act as a support device when wired communication is unavailable. So here we have a clip. This is going to help you visualize kind of what's going on. You can already see the HMI they're going to be using to interact with the control process. And the control rods they'll be talking about is something like an actuator, and the control process being nuclear fission. And you should be able to pick up different components of the ICS system throughout this clip.
Okay, very slow now. Let's ease it down to 700. Whoa, 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 slow.
I didn't move any rods there.
What is this?
I'm not even touching it.
Did everything right and think that maybe the core is poisoned.
Well, if you thought the core was poison, then you didn't do everything right because you're choking my reactor. Get it back up.
I think if we turn off LAC, it may be possible to get more control.
Do it, go.
Right, switch off local automatic control. Go to global. Leonid,
LAC disabled, global control activated.
What did you do?
I did what you said, I switched.
Look at it!
Okay, so what just happened? Why is the reactor stalling when they did everything right? The reactor is stalling and it might cause a failure in the power grid as a consequence, and they would be responsible. So what they tried doing is using manual override by switching off the local automatic control, as they called it, and went to global control. But that seems to make things worse.
So ICS SCADA systems have clear-cut communication protocols and behaviors. The sudden drop in voltage in the megawattage you just saw is a major red flag of abnormal behavior. The operators were not manipulating the control rods, yet the numbers continued to drop and the reactor choked. An on-site audit of the technician logs revealed that the operator interface controls remained unchanged and unauthorized command message manipulation occurred. And the safety instrumented systems were shut down as a result. So don't worry, we'll explain what this all means later on. Essentially, you just witnessed the beginning of a sophisticated cyber attack on nuclear equipment. So from this slide, you can see that there are many ways that the facility could have been hacked, the most severe and complex threats being those of the nation state and advanced persistent threats, also known as APTs. Nation state actors are advanced adversaries who are state sponsored to accomplish specific objectives. So most, if not all, are attributed as APTs, whereas APTs or advanced persistent threats are not always nation state actors. So you can think something as anonymous as an example. So first, we'll focus on threat actors as a whole.
Okay, so here we have a couple threat groups associated with ICS SCADA, attributed by MITRE. MITRE is, for those who don't know, is a non-profit organization that has attributed attacks to different threat groups with descriptive explanations, with their tactics, techniques, and procedures. So this is not a full list, it's just a few of them. And so who done it? Can this attack be attributed to a threat group? You've got ones like Alanite, which is attributed to Russia. You have your APT-33 attributed with Iran. Also oil rig associated with Iran. You got Lazarus with North Korea, and then you've got Xenotime and Sandworm. They haven't really been able to attribute that to a specific region or group yet. And you can kind of see in the middle column what these groups have been able to achieve. So here are a few examples of common exploitations. So living off the land, that's going to be used for lateral movement and ICS interaction. In other words, an attacker is using legitimate functionality to take advantage of your environment. And so this tradecraft is going to use native tools already present on the system to accomplish what the adversary main objective is. You're going to be living off the land with binaries and scripts, and you're going to be using pre-existing verified aspects of programs that have unintended functionality. So things you can expect are like you can execute code, you can compile code, you can do file operations like downloading and uploading, you can copy, and then you can achieve persistence. And then if we move on to modifying control logic, this is where unexpected behavior is modified to accomplish the adversary's desired action. And an adversary can decalibrate a sensor by removing functions in the control logic that account for sensor error. We'll discuss this further in a specific attack. And then you move on to your coordinated attacks, multi-party. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's just multiple teams getting together to collaborate and reach a singular goal. Okay, so the Department of Energy did an analysis in 2011, and this covers assessments from 2003 to 2010, and it provides documentation for assessment methodology and their results. and it identifies IT crossover concerns in an ICS SCADA context. So these are the recommendations that they gave and how they did their analysis. So what they did is they identified known vulnerabilities by taking a look at outdated software and open ports. They took an in-depth look at communication channels. You know, barriers to entry are the only place you can really prevent an intrusion. And you need to take a look at the services your ICS components are running, is that, you know, is that binary that's running the same one that it should be, and has it been modified? Okay, so do these recommendations start reminding you of anything? I mean, we're kind of really getting to the meat and potatoes here of what cybersecurity is, and these recommendations kind of transcend pure IT networks, and they bleed over into OT because we use IT components to run these processes for us. And so we should be aware that these systems are vulnerable to the same kinds of attacks, and the implications are going to be far more serious than your regular IT. Moving on, we have our common ICS vulnerabilities. Here we have a list. And this is from that same paper. These are the top 10 most critical vulnerabilities they found. And so we don't have enough time to cover all of these. So we're just going to take a look at two. We're going to take a look at web HMI vulnerabilities, and we're also going to take a look at SCADA, data, and command injection manipulation and injection. Web HMI vulnerabilities can allow new vectors of attack from interfaces configured explicitly for the control of ICS SCADA systems. Misconfigurations like improper authentication and potential SQL injections provide avenues of attack. User sessions can be hijacked. Web HMI vulnerabilities can give attackers a tunnel into your network. And these type of vulnerabilities make an attractive target for would-be attackers. And this is how the adversary compromised the maintenance workstation in our example. And so then you have your command message manipulation. This allows one to change the functionality of common processes to something else. A well-known example of this would be Stuxnet. So for those who are unfamiliar, the operator would start, so Stuxnet basically targeted an Iranian uranium enrichment process or facility. And so what the operator would do is they would start a centrifuge, set them to a predetermined speed, and as a result of the malware, the underlying software and the sensors were manipulated in such a way that the speed would exceed physical tolerances, but it would not notify the operator. And so it wouldn't go so fast as to cause immediate destruction of the centrifuge, but it would ensure that the uranium enrichment process would be rendered ineffective, and led to the eventual wear and breakage of the centrifuges. And so what else can this do? It allows arbitrary code execution. You can send any desired command regardless of the original purpose of the code. It allows for unauthorized access to functionality level supervisory control functions. And for IT, security is a high priority preserved by confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if you don't have integrity, the other two kind of fall. So how do we secure these vulnerabilities? We do that by securing, so for the web HMI vulnerabilities, we do that by securing unauthorized ports, and we isolate web HMI systems from the business or the internet accessible network, and we need to air gap these systems as much as possible. These recommendations were made because somebody messed them up. This is where it is crucial to understand your company's network topology. You know, maybe you have your own little enclave that you're in charge of, and you don't really know what happens beyond your firewall, your boundary. Well, you need to, because if that traffic's going out somewhere else, you need to know what's happening. So, go, thanks. For the command message manipulation, patches are going to be a no-brainer. Update your systems. And authentication is going to be huge. We need to see who's running the commands, and we need to know that they are the people who are allowed to run them. And integrity checks come into play. We need to talk, when we're talking about binary checks, you know, is run ICS.exe the same binary that it was yesterday and when we configured the system? And the other thing we need to do is we need to encrypt commands that we're sending. So we don't want some man in the middle to sit and sniff our commands in clear text and fully understand our system logic. And so now that we've talked about some of the common vulnerabilities and security methods for those vulnerabilities, we're going to take a look at more targeted ICS attacks. So here's the, well, so we're going to look at MITRE first. So MITRE, again, if you could actually, so this is actually kind of like a really small example, but if, yeah, perfect. So here, if you go to MITRE attack and you go to their industrial control systems page, you'll see here just a bunch of really good information. It's going to tell you all about different things. So, you know, how if you look all the way to the left, how an attacker might gain initial access. And they have all these different examples. And if you click on one, maybe if you go over a little bit to impair process control and down to modify control logic, this is going to give you more in-depth information on that subject. It's going to give you ideas about what's happening. And if you go down, you can see some actual examples, like Triton, which is actually one of the malwares that we're going to be talking about later. Great. And so here's some resources. You've got your USCERT.gov, MITRE again, and MITRE once more, but this one is for the ICS.
Okay, as John mentioned, we'll go ahead and cover some more targeted ICS attacks. The bottom line being that ICS attack tools reduce the level of the specialized knowledge attackers actually required to target ICS. So as ICS is a distinct subdomain to information and computer technology, the successful intrusions and attacks against these systems often require very specialized knowledge, which is establishing a higher threshold for success and successful attacks. So since intrusion and attack tools are often developed by someone who already has that expertise, these tools can help threat actors bypass the need for gaining some of this expertise themselves, or it could help them gain the requisite knowledge more quickly. Alternatively, experienced actors may resort to using known tools or exploits to conceal their identity or maximize their budget. The development and subsequent adoption of standardized cyber operation tools is a general indication of increasing adversarial capabilities. Whether these tools were developed by researchers or as a proof of concept utilized during past incidents, access to any of these can lower the barrier for a variety of actors to learn and develop the future skills or custom attack frameworks for future attacks. Following this premise, equipment that is vulnerable to exploits using cyber operation tools that are already known becomes low-hanging fruit for all sorts of attackers. So while some of the tools included in FireEye's list were created as early as 2014 or 2004, most of the development has taken place during the last 10 years or so. The majority of the tools they analyze also are vendor agnostic, or some are developed to target products from some of the largest ICS original equipment manufacturers. Those are the OEM lists. Siemens stands out in this area because they have about 60% of the vendor-specific tools potentially targeting its products. Other tools that researchers identified were developed to target products from other manufacturers, such as Schneider Electric, GE, et al. This pie chart depicts the number of tools by class. Of note, the network discovery tools make up more than a quarter of the tool chart. Some software exploitation tools host extended repositories for modules to target specific products or vulnerabilities, as mentioned before. So this led to these 4% being added to their own category in the upper left-hand corner. FireEye researchers currently track hundreds of ICS-specific exploit modules related to more than 500 total vulnerabilities, 71% of them being potential 0 days. Immunity Canvas currently has the most exploits due in large part to the efforts of the Russian security firm that you can check out at gleg.net. So up until now, we haven't discussed what specifically affected our power plant's network. So let's take a look at a mock intelligence briefing for this scenario. We just received actionable intelligence from the forward deployed security team. This cyber attack is now clearly an external threat actor with substantial resources who developed a complex human-driven attack. The threat actor is likely an unknown APT, not currently listed on the MITRE attack matrix. The security team has narrowed down the potential malware to 2 strains. Strain number 1 is Indestroyer, also known as Crash Override. In summary, this malware targets the electric grid and is believed to have been behind the 2016 cyber attack that has caused a blackout in Ukraine's capital. Indestroyer includes several modules, including a RAT and backdoor, C2, that is a communication and control, and a data wiper that could do things such as clearing registry keys and overriding generic Windows files. So while the malware was designed to cause power outages, the researchers believe it could have been repurposed to other sectors with just a few other modules. Indestroyer malware represents a scalable, capable platform. These modules and capabilities are publicly reported to appear to focus on organizations such as ICS protocols, which would be like IEC 101, 104, 61850. And this is more commonly used outside the United States in electric power control systems. The platform fundamentally abuses the functionality of a target ICS system's legitimate control system to achieve its intended effect. So while the known capabilities do not appear to be US focused, it is important that we recognize the general TTPs used in Indestroyer and that they can be leveraged with a modified technical implementation to affect the US based critical infrastructure sectors. So with further modification, Indestroyer or similar malware could have implications beyond just the electrical power grid, and all the critical infrastructure organizations should be evaluating their systems to susceptibilities in the TTPs or techniques and procedures outlined. The malware had several reported capabilities. Number 1, issues valid commands directly to the remote terminal units. As you can see, we have just a graphic trying to show the overall scale of it. These RTUs would obviously be falling in the 3rd category. As reported by Dragos, one such command sequence toggles the circuit breakers in a rapid open close pattern, and this can create conditions where individual utilities may island themselves from the infected parties and potentially result in a degradation of the grid reliability. Number 2, it denies service to local serial COM ports on Windows devices. Therefore, it prevents legitimate communications with field equipment over the serial communications to the affected devices. Number 3, it scans and maps the ICS environment using a variety of protocols, and this includes Open Platform Communications, or OPC. This significantly improves the payload's probability for success. Number 4, it could exploit the Siemens relay denial of service, DOS vulnerability, leading to a shutdown of the relay itself. And in this instance, the relay would need to be manually reset to restore functionality. And lastly, on 5, it could include a wiper module in the platform that renders the Windows system inert, requiring a rebuild or backup of the restoration of the device. So as far as detection, as a crash override is a 2nd stage malware capability, and it has the ability to operate independent of the initial C2. Traditional methods of detection may not be sufficient to detect infections prior to the malware executing. As a result, organizations are encouraged to implement behavioral analysis techniques to identify precursor activity to crash override. As additional information becomes available on the stage 1 infection vectors and TTPs, this alert will be updated with a new US-CERT information. Now we have strain number 2, which is Triton, also known as Tricin or Trisis. And this is a malware designed originally to target Schneider Electric's Triconex safety instrumented systems, known as SIS controllers, that are commonly in the energy sector. And Triton is an example of a multi-stage sophisticated ICS tailored malware. Discovered in 2017 after an attack in the Middle East Petrochemicals plant's SIS, Triton took offline 6 emergency shutdown systems that are typically overseen by engineering rather than security teams in separate departments. The malware contained a remote access Trojan that replaced the SIS logic in the final control elements remotely, preventing the safety systems from working correctly. According to MITRE's ICS attack matrix, Triton can reprogram the SIS logic and cause it to trip and shut down a process that is in actuality in a safe state. So in other words, it can trigger a false positive. Triton can also reprogram the SIS logic to allow unsafe conditions to persist. The Triton malware itself is able to add a malicious program to the execution table of the controller. This action leaves the legitimate programs in place. And if the controller fails, Triton would attempt to return it to a running state. So if the controller did not recover within a certain time window, the sample would overwrite the malicious program to cover its tracks. This malware leverages no inherent vulnerability in Schneider Electric's products. The Triconex line of safety systems are leveraged in numerous industries, although each SIS is unique. And in order to understand how it should execute, you need to understand the process implications that would require specific knowledge of the process itself. So this means that the specific instance of its execution is not a highly scalable attack that could be easily deployed across multiple victims without significant additional work. However, this capability, methodology, and tradecraft in this very specific event may now be replicated by other adversaries and thus represents an additional industrial asset owner and operator's threat model. So a few key takeaways include the Triconex SIS controller being configured to a physical key switch in program mode during its operation. So if the Triconex controller is replaced in run mode instead, the program changes not being permitted. Any arbitrary changes after the fact in the logic are not possibly sustainable, reducing the likelihood of manipulation. So compromising the security of an SIS does not necessarily compromise the safety of the system. Safety engineering is a highly specific skill set and adheres to numerous standards and approaches to ensure that a process has a specific safety level. As long as the SIS performs its safety function, the compromising of its security does not represent a danger as long as it fails safe. Despite the attack not being highly scalable, the tradecraft displayed is now available as a blueprint to other adversaries looking to target SIS and represents an escalation in the type of attacks seen to date and is specifically designed to target safety functions of these processes. And it's not currently known what exactly the safety implications of TriSys would be. Logic changes in the final control elements implies that there could be some risk to the safety mechanisms themselves because the set points could not be changed when the safety systems would or would not take control of the process when they reach those unsafe conditions.
Okay, so our cyber threat intelligence team has narrowed the potential malware to that of Triton or Destroyer, as he just went over. And so we must consider the indicators of compromise present at the plant. And we know the commands were manipulated. The power levels dropped and the safety instrumented systems were shut down. However, if the relay experienced a denial of service attack, this would lead to a shutdown of the relay. In this instance, that relay would need to be manually reset to restore functionality. And if all of the operators were inside the control room, no one could have touched that relay. And so we can now rule out Destroyer since none of the monitoring systems shut down, meaning a power outage was not the cause. And we know that the operator had difficulty engaging the safety switch to reestablish the control of the core when they both press down those buttons. Thus, the safety instrumented system did not fail safe, and it continued pumping the wrong megawattage into an unstable reaction, thus resulting in a failure of the core reactor, which panicked the operators. And this reality makes the impact of security breaches far more devastating than a leak of personal emails and passwords like Target. And we're going to see that here.
Coming. 1:23 and 44 seconds. The steam blows more fuel channels apart. We do not know how high the power went. We only know the final reading. Reactor 4, designed to operate at 3,200 megawatts, went beyond 33,000. The pressure inside the core can no longer be held back. At long last, we have arrived. 123.45, explosion. In the instant the lid...
So now that we're cognizant of the devastating impact that the cyber attacks can have on operational technology, we're going to discuss how we can take steps to secure it. Properly implemented defensive techniques and common cyber hygiene practices increase the complexity of barriers that adversaries must overcome to gain unauthorized access to critical information networks and systems. In addition, detection and prevention mechanisms can expose malicious network activity, enabling organizations to contain and respond to intrusions more rapidly. There's no set of defensive techniques or programs that will completely avert all the attacks. However, layered cybersecurity defenses will aid in reducing an organization's attack surface and will increase the likelihood of detection. This layered mitigation approach is known as defensive depth. The National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, known as the NCCIC, has based its mitigations and recommendations on its analysis of the public reporting of this specific malware. Critical infrastructure companies should ensure that they are following the best practices, which are outlined in the 7 steps to effectively defend industrial systems document produced jointly by the DHS, NSA, and FBI. These are the key takeaways that could be found in NIST Special Publication 882, Revision 2. These are network segmentation and segregation, logically separated control networks, and boundary protection. The aim of network segregation and segmentation is to minimize access to sensitive information for those systems and people who do not need it, while ensuring that the organization can continue to operate effectively. I've highlighted the connection between the workstation and controller machine in our specific scenario. You'll notice that the device in between is a layer 2 switch, which makes them physically related. The network engineer should not have connected both the maintenance workstation and the controller machine to the same switch. Doing so made the switch a single point of failure, which in turn compromised the workstation and had a direct path to the controller machine. The best practice is to ensure that ICS networks are logically separate from the corporate networks, and they reside on physically separate network devices. If you look at where the pink line is, and if the engineer had logically separated their network along that line using VLANs and subnets, then the malicious traffic would not have or would have been deterred, and if not, it could have been stopped completely. This, of course, is assuming that we only have the payload itself and it's not a person actively trying to implant it. These measures ensure that we avoid a flat, non-segmented network architecture, and as a result of limiting communication to only the bridges between the designated enclaves, you can significantly reduce your attack surface and closely monitor the expected traffic. Sound check.
Sorry. Your redundant access points should be a feature of your network architecture. And so to logically separate these control networks, your firewall should be configured to deny all traffic except that which is explicitly authorized. And your firewall rules should, at a minimum, provide source and destination filtering, TCP UDP port filtering, and ICMP type and code filtering. So if you want to get fancy, you can do a switch router sandwich where you have an external switch, external router, firewall, internal router, internal switch. And the most basic would be your just a firewall. But if you're working on ICS systems, you need to get fancy and you need to get redundant.
Boundary protection devices determine whether the data transfer is permitted, often by examining the data or associated metadata. At the plant, logs showed RDP activity occurred on TCP port 3389 to the SIS network engineering station. which allowed Triton to compromise the SIS logic. Further investigation revealed that the adversary first pivoted from the controller machine in step 1 to the engineering machine workstation at step 2 in the process control network, and then an outbound TCP connection on a high ephemeral port connected to the RDP station at step 3 that in turn created the RDP session at step 4. So host and network-based intrusion detection systems, firewalls, encrypted tunnels would have created strict access rules for network traffic and early detection of unusual activity such as this, thus preventing the rat from receiving any commands from the C2 servers.
Okay, so what else could they have done? And here we have a list of ICS controls for, again, don't have enough time to go into all of them, so we're just going to focus down again on, we're going to take a look at access control, incident response, and auditing and accountability. So if the plant had had access controls in place, several alerts would have been triggered, and some of the malicious actions could have been blocked. So what are access controls? These are the measures that dictate who can use the systems and what they can use and what they can do and what they can change. You need to make sure people are who they say they are, and you need to ensure people cannot physically access the machines or the network that is not authorized to. And in true risk analysis fashion, you know, sometimes the need for accessibility is greater than the risk present by accepting the accessibility. So maybe you want to utilize a VPN and to assess the systems, and even after we've already gone over everything about reducing exposure, sometimes you just have to kind of accept those kinds of risks. Security controls, incident response. If the facility security engineer had an incident response plan in place, the operators would have had a step-by-step guide to gracefully mitigate the effects of the malware. The response should always be measured first and foremost against the service being provided and not just the system that was compromised. Okay, what this means is, what did the thing do? Is it a downed safety valve, or is it just a downed domain controller? And which one should you prioritize? And because OT has such different priorities than a classic IT network, you probably need to prioritize that safety valve. If you can test the effect of an attack, that will give you insight into options on how you would respond. And then steps to incident response always include preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery. And you should classify potential incidents and potential response actions to those incidents, and the recovery actions taken to restore those to normal operations. And then you have, next. Yeah, then you have auditing and accountability. Who is watching the watchers? What is the effectiveness of the controls you have in place? What are the automated processes being manually monitored are the automated processes being manually monitored and inspected? You set up, an IDS. Are you checking the logs? Are you doing what you need to do? You need to test these processes often to see where your weaknesses are. A red team can be really useful in this regard because they can mimic adversary action. And are you complying to your ICS security program that was set up? And are you meeting the established standards? So let's review the concepts of what an ICS security program covers.
For those who may not know how to gauge their organization's cybersecurity program, maturity models can visualize the shortcomings highlighted from gap analysis. Model-based improvement serves to indicate shortcomings to idealize performance within various aspects of your program. Standards and frameworks usually stem from peer groups or development organizations. These provide the telemetry necessary to assess how your organization measures up within your desired program maturity models. Here's an example of a maturity lifecycle model for securing engineering, SCADA, and real-time operational systems. The diagram depicted models how most organizations step through the various phases of security maturity. Phase 1 usually starts by conducting site assessments, defining cybersecurity standards that govern the technical and procedural controls, and developing a common network architecture or framework for how cybersecurity technology can be woven into your system. Phase 2 involves user training and project development that adhere to the created standards and models from Phase 1. Phase 3 consists of taking action to implement the outlined steps for cybersecurity. This involves network segmentation and segregation from the perimeter, as well as between each designated zone. Further defensive solutions involve hardening endpoints and securing remote access to SCADA and DCS. The second half of Phase 3 concerns implementing proactive defensive solutions, such as authentication through Active Directory, centralized logging, in addition to networking, monitoring, and alerting within SIM solutions. Lastly, Phase 4 covers recertification, assessments, or auditing. This provides continuous testing and updates to deploy new reconfigurations or technology concurrent to any staff modifications necessary. NIST, also known as the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is an excellent resource to consult for guidance. NIST conveniently offers something called Framework, which you might now find useful. Created through the collaboration between industry and the government, the voluntary framework consists of standards, guidelines, and practices that promote the protection of critical infrastructure. The prioritized, flexible, repeatable, and cost-effective approach of framework helps owners and operators of critical infrastructure to manage cybersecurity risk. So we encourage you to start with any standard and to demonstrate your compliance. There's a variety of ways you can do so. In conclusion, we ask that you please ensure you meet or exceed compliance standards by implementing continuous testing. Here's a quick look at our resources. So thank you for all participating. We'll take the next few minutes to answer your questions in the Q&A. Okay, I see, how did Indestroyer and Triton get into the networks in the first place? One thing that we do know is that there's no publicly acknowledged entry vector for both strains of malware. But what we do know in the terms of Triton, as we said, it was what modifies SIS controllers. We know that there's a specific proprietary protocol. I want to say it's it's like Tri-System, which is something that we believe the adversary had to reverse engineer for its protocol. We know that there's software and hardware availability for that specific SIS controller that could have potentially just allowed them to insert a malicious payload through a specific customized program. There's nothing publicly acknowledging how they managed to spread that to the area of concern. As far as Indestroyer, same thing with the electrical grid. There's only a specific module associated that has impacted the Ukraine power grid in December 2016. So we don't necessarily know if there was any prior testing that allowed them to transfer that by any remote means. Okay. I don't see any further questions as of now. Okay, can the contents of this webinar be accessible offline via PowerPoint or any other way? I am aware that our marketing will provide this on our CSMP YouTube channel. I encourage you all to take a look at that for past webinars, and they'll continually be uploaded as these progress.
I see another question. It says, I understand that even air-gapped systems can be breached. How does this happen, and how does one secure against these type of breaches? So in the case of Stuxnet, you had air-gapped systems, and what they did is it would infect different USB devices and spread that way. And so that's how it's gonna get over. It's gonna be able to cross over those types of boundaries, because obviously you can't just send it over the internet if it's air-gapped. So you have to start getting creative, and you have to infect, enough computers around like throughout a company that is connected to the internet, to be able to finally get the virus on a flash drive that's going to go to your, like, to the system that is affected. And so they would put logic in it to only trigger once it knows that it's on a system. So it would run a test, like, hey, am I on the system that has the centrifuges on it? And no, okay, so I'm going to just keep quiet, and I'm going to keep spreading. And once it gets on one that's when it finally infects and does it that way. And so to prevent against it, you need to train. You need to train your people to not plug in USB devices, to be cognizant of the way that viruses spread, and just have policies in place. Maybe you want to even get as extreme as putting hot glue inside a USB port. Make sure that everyone knows that, hey, don't do that.
Okay, I see another question that says, are there any parallels to these kinds of threats in transportation infrastructure? As far as infrastructure, I will say that, our OT components do not change. There's always some way that a module can be customized in order to fit a specific need. As we mentioned before, everything has to be associated with a certain process. So it's contingent upon who has a very thorough understanding of a process. So in the case that it's transportation infrastructure, I guess a quick example, not necessarily infrastructure, but transportation being like the CAN bus of a modernized vehicle, which if you can alter that or remotely connect to it, obviously you can send false signals and indicators to the vehicle itself and try to trick its computing into thinking that it's, or giving the appearance that something's happening when really it's not, or you can physically affect it and cause first order effects as a result.
Another one I see, moral of the story is, for good OT security, good solid IT security is needed. Is the reverse also true? In a way, if you start considering OT type of situations, you're gonna immediately just kind of think of, okay, physical security. We have this huge plant, and we need to make sure that only the people we want to be there, are the only ones who can get there. And so you can take some lessons from OT and apply them to IT, and you're gonna definitely take lessons from IT and apply them to OT, especially as we keep computerizing these processes.
I will chime in and say that OT is a little unique because in an OT environment, you're well aware of legacy systems, how they operate, what communicates to what. And as you said, if we have specific zones for a specific function, then we know that anything abnormal, like if you conduct long tail analysis and you see something's talking on an unusual protocol that's unexpected, obviously those send red flags to us as defenders. So one thing unique to OT is the fact that we can put physical restraints and parameters onto something, because if we have, I don't know, an oil tank or something that's supposed to transport a fluid, if we want to prevent it from leaking over or someone inducing something that will cause it to spill to another machine via pipe, we can actually engineer the pipe itself to have the physical constraint of only sending a specific amount through. Like the difference between IT being that there's so many other vectors that the effects could have several repercussions of. The actual physical engineering of OT within these older systems can prevent some of these attacks from happening.
Any other questions?
Okay, nothing seen, nothing heard. I do appreciate all of you for participating tonight, and I think we'll go ahead and end it here.